This is W.I. Black here. I have another story for you today. This one is titled The Trees. I hope you enjoy. The trees are like watchers, vanguards of the forest, primordial protectors, Gaia's vengeance, children of Mother Nature's womb. Who can escape their gaze? In the air, about 100 clicks from the destination, sat Private Housecombe ruminating on the alacrity with which the army had sent him on a combat mission. He'd only finished his basic training 2 weeks prior and was assured that he would be flying to some easy assignment in Italy where he would be drinking coffee, smoking cigars, and flirting with the local women. Less than 24 hours earlier, some general had been putting together a crackpot mission involving paratroopers being hauled into the Black Forest of Germany on some rescue mission and it needed fresh meat. Like anything involving top brass, rarely was there detail to be spared, and the more questions asked meant more punishment merited. Housecombe, with the rest of the recently christened maggots, hung their smooth faces, hailed a yes sir, and collected the gear and assembled in formation on the airfield. "Hey, Housecombe," screamed Private Jordan. "Once we get through saving this bunch of dumbasses, maybe we can make our way to Dusseldorf and get some Helgas." Jordan finished making a couple of lewd hand movements and started laughing. "You're going to be looking funny talking to a Helga with your shit blown off," Jordan retorted Corporal Flitz, pantomiming a gun going off in his direction. "Like I'm really worried about some fucking Kraut militia service down there. Probably a bunch of stupid farmers who surprised them in their sleep or something. The Wehrmacht were disbanded after Germany conceded, so I don't see why there would be any concern," snorted Private Jordan. "Anything that takes a squad of our men out is a concern to us. Do you hear me, you piece of shit?" screamed Sergeant Torgay. "Now, I don't want a single one of you underestimating what we're getting into. Truth be told, we have no intel about what's down there. That is why we're flying in at night. Last reports said that there wasn't any type of hardware in the area, so we should be able to get down safely. But after that, we're in the dark. So no big dicking around, or you might find yourself scooping up your innards. We should be at our destination in about 30 minutes, so prep your gear and catch your breath before shit hits." It'd be just a few minutes before they made their jump. Each soldier was securing his parachute and making sure their weapons were loaded. Private Housecombe stood waiting, his heartbeat racing. He had jumped out of a plane on numerous occasions, but never liked the sensation of floating as a chute caught. He found it nauseating. He tried to time his breathing to calm his nerves, but it never helped. Light was red. "Listen up. Once you make it to the ground, regroup at the rendezvous and await further orders," yelled Sergeant Torgay. Light turned green. One by one, the soldier began making the jump into the void below. As Private Housecombe jumped, he felt the cord pull, and then the familiar and dreadful sensation of suspension washed over him all at once. He closed his eyes and mouthed a prayer for comfort. Drops only took minutes to be completed, but it felt like eons. Finally, he opened his eyes and looked down. Another minute, and he would be plunging through the canopy of trees into the Black Forest. He considered what lay before them and hoped Private Jordan was right when he said it was some inept local militia who still held on to the old beliefs and that they had just gotten lucky when it came to the last squad who was there. Bracing for impact, he slammed through the trees and branches and limbs, walloping and lacerating him as he descended. His parachute got caught in the canopy, causing him to dangle some 10 feet off the ground. In the distance, he could hear the others breaking through. Retrieving his knife from his holster, he began sawing the straps. As the straps gave way, he sailed to the ground, landing in a sitting position. Clambering to his feet, dusting off as he did, the sound of gunfire pricked his ears. Did they really make contact that quickly? They must have fallen right on their location, he thought. He checked his rifle and began in the direction of the gunfire. It didn't take him long before he realized something was wrong. The gunfire had ceased and no other sound could be heard. He figured that at least the victor would be shouting or making some kind of commotion to commemorate another fallen enemy, but nothing but silence ensued. Unsure of his next move, he began collecting leaves, branches, and other forest debris to make a cover for himself while he went prone. He lay motionless for an indeterminate amount of time as the nightmarish forest loomed all around him. He was separated from the squad and had no inclination what he was supposed to do if he could not re-engage. Disoriented, his courage has dwindled as the ambience of the forest grew more oppressive by the minute. He knew it sounded delirious, but by God he was certain the forest was alive. "These trees are like watchers," he mused, suffocated by the pungent stench of the forest that he lay covered in. Their eyeless trunks penetrated his soul with their ominous gaze. It was then that the forest began making sounds which coated him with goose flesh. Spindly branches worked their way to and fro, crackling, a disturbing portent as the night air stood still. He was not certain, but he felt as though the trees were speaking some ancient language of their mother's tongue. These whispers were interrupted by brief and inarticulate cries of the most macabre nature. Ever so often an articulation was made, and he would shiver with stark terror in the realization. The trees! He knew what they were, the cries of his brothers. What in God's name is happening to them, he thought. By now the meek cover he lay under was more to assuage his fear than for actual protection, as he knew whatever ghastly means by which those screams were permitted would surely rip him from the very spot with nay a struggle. The branches continued to creak in the stifling air. The screams had finally ceased, and with that recognition he lamented for those whose end he was certain was most horrific. He began to pray that some had escaped unscathed, and wondered if there were others like himself who lay in desperation while awaiting some malign presence to make a swift end of his inconsequential existence. Through the trees he could see into the night sky. The moon hung low, illuminating the forest with its pallid glow, eerie and repulsive. Growing uncomfortable from being in the same position for what seemed an interminable amount of time, he began to feel the effervescent hysteria threatening to plunge him into a giddy lunacy. Despite it being midwinter, sweat was beading on his face. "These damnable trees," he whispered laconically. His eyes began to water as fear were gaining. He knew that he must make an attempt at escaping, though his bearings were distorted from fear. He could at least use the moon's position in the sky to help ascertain an appropriate course. As the impetus to move was welling up inside him, he faltered. Holding his breath, his clarity began to dissolve. He began to speak, but not as one racked with fear, but with defeat and revelation. "I see them starting, their glowing gazes, how they brood, menace, seethe, and abhor. These scathing trees, malicious and primordial, how long have they awaited their pernicious task? What have we done to deserve this?" Finishing his soliloquy, he burst from his nest in an inhuman haste, sprinting in the direction he felt most likely to yield and escape. As he ran, he felt the sensation of being trapped. The trees seemed to be getting more and more dense. How the air grew ever more stifling. It was rank with notes of carrion and blood. With the number of screams he had heard, he anticipated seeing the gore of the freshly slain, but it never came. It had not stopped for some time. Growing weary from exertion, he slowed to a halt to catch his breath. His chest heaving in great swells, he caught notice of an object lying on the ground not far from where he stood. The silhouette in the dark almost resembled a person. Inching toward the unknown heap, he hoped perhaps it was another soldier who was only unconscious or feigning death. As he stood over the mound, he ascertained that it was a soldier based on the uniform. Nudging the man, he waited for a response that never came. Frowning, he knelt to reveal the soldier's face, but stopped as terror gripped him. "This can't be," he ruminated in shock. "This man has my uniform on." His heart beat fiercely, his breath coming in spurts as he began hyperventilating. A tightness began to grow in his chest, gripping him with vice-like claws. His stomach began to pain as nausea was washing over him in undulance. He knew there was precious time for him to waste, but he must be sure of what he was seeing. The thought occurred to him that this whole event might have been some fabrication in his mind due to the mental strain from the rigors of the unknown. But something about this was not some mental aberration, but a reality of unfortunate consequence. "Do I want to know the truth about this?" he asked timidly. He pondered for but a moment as the impulse seized him, and without ease he yanked the man over to stare at the soldier's upturned face. He let out a shriek as the revelation drove this horrific scene deep into his soul, inflicting a wound that could never heal. This could not be, he screamed. He began convulsing with hysterics, shaking his head back and forth as he beat the ground with his fists, repeatedly pleading with the cosmos. Why, why, why? Slowly he angled his head and was hit with the most diabolic sight he had ever seen. Perhaps more so than any mortal had seen or could stomach without slipping into a state of raving lunacy. Before him stood the blackest trees ever to exist. They were ancient, light-consuming, and necrotic. These were the trees of damnation. The effluence of sap was a fearful thing to behold, viscous, crimson, and baleful. This sanguinary fluid poured out onto the ground, approaching him, threatened to envelop. As the malevolent titans loomed over him, he trembled, languishing in the moment for that inescapable fate, that rending of bone and flesh, the sound of his blood-curdled scream as he saw his life force flung across the forest like some possessed painter consumed by inspiration for which was to be exercised. He wanted to beg them for his life, but the only words he could speak were but a hushed whisper as he stared into the darkness of the void of the trees. Be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment. Thank you again. Until next time.